Hello there. My name's Paul. I'm 83 years old. I was born in Melbourne. I've lived here all my life. I'm retired, of course, at the age of 83, long ago. I used to work in education. I was a high school teacher, and then I went on to work at a university. I'm not an expert in the history of our Indigenous peoples. I certainly learned nothing much about them when I went to school, primary school and secondary school. That came later. I have visited Central Australia and Northern Territory a few times. I've read a bit about their history. And I've been meeting with people, a small number of people of Indigenous background in recent years. Most importantly, I've read the Uluru Statement, which was prepared in 2017, and it represents the views of a large number of people, leading people, representing quite a wide range of people from all over Australia. And they met together over several days and came out with this lengthy statement. I think it's a very moving statement, beautifully written. And to me, it expresses the torment of the experiences that they've had over generations as a result of colonisation. I think the continuing effects of that colonisation are still present, not as they were 200 years ago, but they're still there, and it's affecting our Indigenous peoples in many different ways. What the Uluru Statement is asking for is quite simple. It's requesting the voice of a few people representing the wider population of Indigenous people in this country to be heard and to be listened to. To be heard and to be listened to. A lot of the discussion that's been going on ever since the referendum was announced has made this apparently a very complicated question with ifs and buts and doubts and question marks and so on. And yes, some of the statements are true, others are not. But I think the actual question is a very simple one. At least it is for me. It's a simple question which requires an answer of yes or no. My response to that simple question is equally simple. I'm voting yes. The Indigenous people want to be recognised as the original inhabitants of this land. They've been here for 65,000 years. They want to choose the people who can represent them. They want to form an advisory committee, a voice, to present their views to Parliament and to the government. Note, advisory committee, nothing more. They just want people to talk with people in leading positions and have their voices heard. And that, I think, is a perfectly reasonable question, and that's why I'm voting yes. But I want to add a few comments. 4 of them. Firstly, we live in a democracy. Thank goodness for that. And whether you vote personally yes or no is your democratic right. If you've already made up your mind, definitely yes or no, then fine, then so be it. That's your business. But if you're not sure, and I believe a lot of people are not sure, then I'm going to ask you to think in a positive light, think optimistic, think of Australia's reputation as a fair-minded people. Think about how a yes vote might just help in the future for a people who've undergone serious difficulties in the past. So that's my first request. Just think about that. Secondly, a lot of the debate in the newspapers and the media has brought up issues, and many of them centre on the question of racism is this question a racist question? I want to deal with that one because I think it's been very confusing and very misleading. The word Aboriginal does not refer to a race. Yes, of course, the original Aboriginal people of this country were black, and they were affected by racism, by hatred against them by white British colonialists. No question of that. But the word Aboriginal comes from the Latin ab origine, from the beginning, from the original. It's simply a reference to who was here first. It's not a description of a race. And I can prove that to you by looking at how the word is used in other countries. If we take, and this is my third point, if we think this referendum is revolutionary, well, really it isn't. It's something that's been done in other countries that have had Aboriginal people living there, countries like Canada, countries like Finland. The Canadian example is, I think, a prime example. For 40 years, Canadians have been developing relationships of a formal kind with their Indigenous people. Were those Indigenous people a single race? No. There are three kinds of Aboriginal peoples in Canada. The First Nations people, the ones who were there first, is what we often call Indians, Red Indians in the old days of movies. But they're only one of the groups. Others are Inuits, the people living nearer the North Pole. Eskimos is the common term. That's the second group. And a third group are the Métis, a group developed as a result of French colonisers cohabiting with other original Aboriginal groups and producing a third group. Canada simply recognises these as the Aboriginal peoples of their country and has worked out ways of recognising their rights to have distinctive backgrounds and to be listened to. And fourthly, perhaps you're unsure because there's not enough detail in the proposal. That's true. There's not a great deal of detail in the proposal. It's just a simple question. But that's deliberate. This is a constitutional amendment. Constitutions are about general principles. They're not about fine detail. Fine detail is left to the Parliament, to the government, to discuss with Aboriginal peoples afterwards, after the general principle has been accepted. So my view on this is, let's think positive, approve this idea, and then the government, Parliament, in conjunction with groups of people representing the Aboriginal peoples, will talk about the fine detail. There are ideas about how that should be done. That's been talked about already before, but that's just proposals. The fine detail in law will come later when the Parliament makes a decision about it. So that's fairly simple. Just let's have a voice to represent the views of the Aboriginal peoples of this country. My final message then is a simple one. On October the 14th, forget the politics, forget the newspapers, forget the Facebook discussions and all the rest. Forget me for that matter. Just look into your own heart, into your own soul, your own values, and ask yourself how your vote will affect Australia and make it a better place for this country, for everyone who lives in it, all the peoples of Australia, including the ones who've been sadly neglected for more than 200 years. Think positive. Thank you.